Can I talk to somebody who's ever been shaken out of their sleep between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m., heart pounding, mind racing, so wide awake when the world is still asleep? Because if that's you, baby, I need you to understand something. That is not just a restless night. That is a divine appointment. That's heaven calling your name. You see, I came here to speak to the warriors, the dreamers, the ones who feel like something is shifting in their spirit in the early hours of the morning. I know it feels heavy sometimes. I know it feels like worry, like confusion, like silence. But can I tell you the truth? That is when God speaks the loudest, not with noise, but with nudges. So before you reach for your phone, before you scroll, before you convince yourself you're just anxious or tired, pause. Because I believe if you wake up between 3 and 5 a.m., there's a reason. And today we're going to talk about what you need to do with that moment, that window, that call from above. When you wake up between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m., the first instinct for many of us is to groan, maybe roll over, or reach for something to distract us from the silence. But that moment is sacred. It's divine. It's not a disruption. It's an invitation. And the first response in that holy hour should be prayer. But I'm not talking about the kind of prayer you memorize, recite, or rush through just to check it off your list. I'm talking about intentional prayer, the kind that comes from the deepest place inside of you, the place that knows pain, the place that knows purpose, the place that knows that if God doesn't show up, you're not making it out of this season whole. Intentional prayer is raw. It's honest. It's the kind of prayer where you don't try to impress God with your words because you already know He knows your thoughts. You don't cover it up. You don't pretend. You come undone. You bring your whole self, the messy self, the scared self, the confused self, the tired self. You lay it all bare before God, not because He needs the update, but because you need the release. That 3 a.m. moment isn't just about speaking, it's about surrendering. It's about falling into the arms of the one who sees you fully and still chooses you completely. See, when you pray with repetition, it's easy to disconnect. Your lips are moving, but your heart is asleep. You say the words you've always said, and maybe they're good words. Maybe they're scripture or affirmations, but if your soul isn't behind them, they're just noise in the silence. But when you pray with intention, every word becomes a lifeline. Every pause becomes a holy moment. Every tear that falls is collected in the presence of a God who never sleeps, who never slumbers, who never stops listening. Intentional prayer isn't about perfection. It's about alignment. It's about shifting your spirit from panic to peace, from distraction to divine connection. It's the difference between calling out and actually connecting. And I believe that when God wakes you up in that hour, He's not calling you to repeat what you've always said. He's calling you to speak from where you really are. That kind of prayer doesn't require fancy language. It requires truth, the truth about what's hurting you, the truth about what you're afraid of, the truth about how tired you are of being strong for everybody else. That kind of truth becomes a weapon. It becomes a healing. It becomes worship. Sometimes intentional prayer isn't even about talking. Sometimes it's about listening. It's about sitting in the stillness and letting God speak into the parts of you that have been silent for too long. We don't always need more words. Sometimes we need more awareness. God isn't always trying to fix your circumstances. Sometimes He's trying to shift your perspective. But you'll miss it if all you're doing is talking to be heard. Prayer is a two-way conversation. And in the quiet of 3 a.m., when the noise of the world fades away, you can finally hear the whisper of God. You have to train yourself to stop treating prayer like a transaction and start treating it like a transformation. We're not here to place an order with God and hope He delivers in 2 business days. We're here to align with His will, to tap into His power, and to let Him reshape our hearts. Intentional prayer is the kind of prayer that moves things in the spirit realm before anything moves in the physical. It's the prayer that says, God, I don't just want you to change my situation. I want you to change me. So when you wake up between 3 and 5, don't pray like it's a habit. Pray like it's a lifeline. Pray like your breakthrough is in the next breath. Pray like the version of you that you're becoming is on the other side of that conversation. Let your prayer be ugly. Let it be groaning. Let it be loud or quiet or silent if it needs to be. But let it be real. God doesn't need your performance. He wants your presence. Prayer in that hour is powerful because it's vulnerable. There are no masks at 3 a.m. There's no performance, no curated self, no social media highlight reel. It's just you and God. And in that moment, he begins to pour strength into places you didn't even know were weak. He begins to speak peace over battles you thought you'd have to fight alone. He begins to remind you who you really are, not what life called you, not what trauma named you, not what fear convinced you of. He calls you his. And when you step into intentional prayer like that, you don't come out the same. Even if your circumstances don't shift immediately, you do. Your mindset changes, your spirit strengthens, your perspective widens, and suddenly what felt like an interruption becomes an encounter. You stop dreading those early wake-up calls and start expecting them. Because you know they're not random. You know they're a signal that God is doing something in you, through you, and for you. And you wouldn't want to miss that for anything. There's something sacred about the stillness between 3 and 5 a.m. It's like the world hasn't fully woken up yet, but your spirit has. And in that quiet, when your thoughts aren't yet bombarded by demands and distractions, there is a whisper that rises from deep within, a whisper that doesn't always make sense to the logical mind, but resonates with your soul. That whisper is what you need to capture. That's where the journaling comes in. Not the polished journaling, not the curated thoughts or the Instagram-worthy quotes, but the raw, messy, unfiltered truth of what your spirit is speaking before your mind gets the chance to clean it up and make it palatable. See, when God speaks, it's often subtle. It's not always thunder and lightning. Sometimes it's a nudge, a phrase, a name, a vision, a sentence that drops into your chest out of nowhere. Sometimes it doesn't even feel like a full thought, but just a pull. And if you're not paying attention, if you don't honor it enough to write it down, you'll miss it. The mind will talk you out of it. The enemy will distract you. Life will pull you into its chaos. And what God whispered to your soul will be buried beneath the noise of the day. But when you journal, when you put pen to paper in those early hours, you create a space where heaven and earth meet. You give language to the formless. You make the invisible real. You don't need to know exactly what it means. You don't need to make it pretty. You just need to get it out. Because your spirit is trying to speak. Your inner self, the one who's been praying, growing, healing, is trying to rise. And it needs room to do so. It needs space where it doesn't have to compete with your logic, your ego, or your fear. There is power in capturing the voice of your soul before your mind shuts it down. Your mind will always try to protect you. It wants reason, it wants proof, it wants structure. But your spirit doesn't operate on logic, it operates on truth. And sometimes that truth doesn't look rational. Sometimes it says, start the business when your bank account says no. Sometimes it says, let them go when your heart still feels attacked. Sometimes it says, move when nothing around you has changed. But if you only let your mind lead, you'll miss what your spirit knows. That's why journaling in that early hour is not optional, it's vital. It's not just about reflection, it's about revelation. It's about allowing yourself to be a vessel. It's about recognizing that some of your greatest breakthroughs, some of your deepest answers aren't going to show up when you're in control. They're going to come when you surrender. When you sit in the dark with a pen in your hand and say, God, I don't know what you're doing, but I'm listening. And then you write. You write what feels strange. You write what feels holy. You write what feels scary. You write what you don't yet understand. And in the process, you start to see patterns. You start to notice that what felt random is actually rhythm, that what felt disjointed is actually divine. Sometimes what you journal at 3:47 a.m. won't make sense until 3 weeks later. Sometimes it'll come back to you mid-conversation, or when you're facing a decision, or when your faith is starting to slip. And because you wrote it down, because you honored the voice of your spirit before your mind could silence it, you'll have something to return to. A roadmap, a reminder, a record of what God said before life got loud. That journal becomes sacred ground. It becomes evidence of how far you've come and how deeply you've been guided. And let me say this, you don't need to be a writer to journal. This isn't about grammar. This isn't about structure. This isn't about sounding deep or poetic. This is about being honest, about capturing truth in real time, about creating a safe space where you don't have to make sense, you just have to be present. And over time, that act of showing up for yourself, of writing what you feel, what you fear, what you hope for, becomes a spiritual discipline. It trains you to listen. It sharpens your discernment. It builds your trust in your own spirit. You begin to realize that you're not as confused as you thought you were. You're not as lost as you felt. You just haven't given yourself permission to speak without editing. You haven't allowed your spirit to be louder than your survival mode. And that's what journaling at this hour does. It brings your inner world to the surface. It gives you a place to lay down the dreams that scare you, the wounds that haunt you, the prayers you're too afraid to pray out loud. And when you write it, it becomes real. It becomes weighty. It becomes seen. There will be mornings when you don't know what to write. That's okay. Right there. Right, God, I don't have the words. Right, I feel numb. Right, I want to believe, but I don't right now. Because even in the absence of clarity, there is presence. And presence is enough. The act of showing up, of choosing to be still and right anyway, that is faith. That is surrender. That is obedience. You are building a bridge between your earthly self and your eternal call. And that kind of bridge is built one page at a time. You don't need to wait for a crisis to journal. You don't need to be in pain to write. The more consistent you are, the more attuned you become. You start to recognize when a thought is yours and when it's divine. You start to notice when fear is speaking and when faith is rising. And before long, you realize that those early wake-up calls are not interruptions. They're invitations to deeper intimacy, to greater clarity, to transformation. In your journal, it's the altar where that transformation begins. There's something most of us struggle with, and it's not the noise we hear, it's the silence we run from, the silence that creeps in during those early morning hours between 3 and 5 a.m. When the house is quiet, the phone isn't buzzing, the world is still tucked under its covers, and it's just you, your thoughts, and your spirit. That silence can be uncomfortable, especially when we've been taught to feel it. We turn on music, we scroll, we reach for something, anything to avoid the weight of stillness. But what if the silence isn't empty? What if the silence is where the real answers live? What if God speaks the clearest when everything else is quiet? Listening in stillness is not about doing nothing. It's about doing the most important thing. It's about choosing presence over productivity. We live in a world that's obsessed with movement, obsessed with output, obsessed with constant noise that drowns out our inner voice. But in those hours before the sun rises, before the day demands your energy, you're given a gift. The gift of quiet, the gift of space, the gift of hearing what you can't hear when life gets loud. And if you always rush to fill the silence, you'll miss what the silence is trying to say. Stillness is spiritual, stillness is sacred, and stillness is a skill. It takes practice to stop reacting, to stop filling every moment with activity, to stop assuming that silence means something is wrong, because sometimes silence is just space for alignment. It's space for your soul to catch up with your body. It's space for your heart to soften. It's space for your spirit to listen, not just for a sound, but for a shift. There's a difference between hearing and listening. Hearing picks up noise. Listening picks up direction. Listening in stillness is not just about tuning in. It's about surrendering your need to control what you hear. When you sit in the stillness of those early hours, you may feel restless at first. You might feel like nothing is happening. You might wonder if you're wasting time. But the truth is, your spirit is adjusting. It's detoxing from distraction. It's unclenching from the tension of the day before. And in that space, something begins to open. You begin to hear thoughts you didn't know you had. You begin to notice how fast your mind runs when you don't distract it. And more importantly, you begin to recognize the difference between your own anxiety and God's whisper. Sometimes God won't speak until you stop speaking, not because he can't, but because you're not able to receive it yet. Listening in stillness is a way of saying, I'm not here just to talk. I'm here to be taught. It's an act of humility, an act of trust, a declaration that says, God, I trust what you have to say more than I trust what I want to hear. Because let's be honest, most of us come to God with an agenda. We want answers. We want confirmation. We want peace, but we want it on our terms. Stillness removes the terms. It opens us up to the unexpected. It teaches us to be okay with waiting. It teaches us to sit without forcing a result. In the stillness, you start to become aware of things that normally slip past you. The tightening in your chest you've been ignoring, the repeating thought you've been suppressing, the gentle nudge to forgive, to release, to shift direction. These things don't shout, they whisper. They emerge in silence, and if you don't sit long enough to hear them, they get buried under your busy. There's healing in stillness, but healing takes attention. It takes time. It takes space, and the more you resist it, the more you delay the restoration your soul is craving. You don't need to know how to do it right. This isn't about posture or perfection. This isn't meditation with an agenda. This is about sacred space. This is about creating room in your spirit for the divine to speak. It can look like sitting on the edge of your bed in the dark, eyes closed, heart open. It can look like walking slowly around your house with no sound but your breath. It can look like placing your hand on your heart and just saying, I'm here, I'm listening. The form doesn't matter, the presence does. Stillness teaches you to recognize the voice of God in the absence of volume. So many of us wait for signs. We wait for dramatic moments. But God often chooses subtlety, a thought you didn't expect, a peace that settles over you without reason, a quiet strength rising in your chest. These are not accidents. These are signals. And if you're too busy talking, moving, scrolling, or controlling, you'll miss them. The discipline of stillness sharpens your discernment. You begin to feel when something is off. You begin to sense when something is divine. You begin to develop a sensitivity that doesn't require a crisis to hear clearly. There will be times in life when you don't know what to do next, when nothing is working, when prayers feel unanswered and doors feel stuck. And in those moments, your instinct might be to do more, hustle harder, push through. But what if the answer is not in doing more, but in being still more? What if clarity doesn't come from effort, but from alignment? What if everything you're striving to hear is already available, but the volume of your life is turned up too loud? Stillness isn't passive. It's powerful. It's where you remember that you are not your performance. You are not your productivity. You are not your plans. You are a vessel. And vessels must be still to be filled. When you learn to listen in stillness, you start to trust yourself more, not because you suddenly have all the answers, but because you've tuned into the source that does. You no longer need external validation for every step. You stop doubting your instincts. You stop overthinking every move because your spirit becomes trained to recognize divine timing, divine rhythm, divine presence. You become less reactive and more rooted, less frantic and more focused. You begin to walk with a peace that confuses people because they think you should be stressed. You begin to carry a clarity that others try to explain logically, but can only be understood spiritually. Stillness gives you access, not just to God, but to yourself. The self beneath the roles, the self beneath the trauma, the self you've been too busy to meet. And once you meet her, you'll never settle for noise again. There's a power in your words that most people underestimate, not because they don't speak, but because they don't speak with authority. They don't realize that what they say before the world wakes up can shift the entire atmosphere of their day. Between 3 and 5 a.m., before your phone starts ringing, before emails pile up, before your name is called 100 different ways, there's a moment that belongs to you. And in that moment, you get to decide how you will show up, not how the world tells you to show up, not how your past says you're supposed to show up, but how your purpose demands that you show up. You set that tone not by accident, but by declaration. There's something spiritual about speaking out loud when no one else is around to hear it. It's not for them. It's not performance. It's proclamation. You are announcing to heaven, to the atmosphere, to your doubt, and to your destiny that you are not here to live on autopilot. You are not here to survive one more day in silence. You are here to live on purpose, with purpose, for purpose. And that declaration needs to come from your lips before purpose, for purpose. And that declaration needs to come from your lips before the world tries to hand you its narrative. Because if you don't claim your identity in the morning, the world will define it for you by noon. When you wake up in that holy window, your spirit is more sensitive. You're not yet covered in the layers of the day. That's the time to speak life, to call things into order, to remind your heart, your mind, your body, and your calling who they belong to and what they're here for. That's not fluff. That's not hype. That's warfare. Every time you declare your purpose, you break an agreement with confusion. Every time you speak what God said about you, you cancel out the lies that try to creep in before breakfast. And I don't care how strong you are, if you're not speaking life, something else is speaking by default. Silence isn't always neutral. Sometimes it's consent. You've got to learn to prophecy over your own life. You can't wait for someone to call you gifted, anointed, worthy, or chosen. You've got to wake up and say it over yourself, not because you're arrogant, but because you're aligned. You've got to say, I am the head and not the tail. I am above and not beneath. I am chosen, equipped, and enough for everything God is calling me to do today. You don't whisper that. You speak that. You declare it in the face of fear, in the face of imposter syndrome, in the face of every generational lie that said you weren't good enough, smart enough, strong enough. You speak until you believe it. And then you keep speaking so you don't forget. The truth is, there are things trying to set the tone for you before you even leave the house. Old thoughts, trauma responses, the voice of your past, the pressure of people's expectations. If you're not careful, those voices will become louder than your inner truth. And so before anything else gets access to your spirit, you've got to raise your voice. You've got to create the sound that your future can follow. You've got to align your words with your assignment. Don't just speak about what you hope for. Speak from the place of who you already are in the spirit. Don't just react to your circumstances. Respond from your calling. The enemy isn't intimidated by noise. The enemy is intimidated by clarity. The enemy doesn't care if you're busy, he cares if you're bold. And boldness starts in the dark. It starts when you choose to open your mouth and say what you mean before you're asked to explain it. You don't need a stage to make a declaration. You don't need a crowd to make it count. All you need is a moment of agreement with heaven. A moment where you say, I may not see it yet, but I'm walking in it. I may not feel it today, but I'm assigned to it. I may not have all the answers, but I am already enough for what's next. That declaration builds muscle in your spirit. It trains you to stop waiting for permission and start walking in authority. You don't have to yell it, but you do have to mean it. This isn't about volume, it's about intention. Sometimes it's one sentence, sometimes it's a string of affirmations. Sometimes it's scripture turned into a statement of power, but the point is, you don't let the world speak louder than your spirit. You don't let comparison mute your courage. You don't let insecurity do the talking when you've been given divine breath to shape the atmosphere around you. Because words build worlds. And before anyone else gets to build yours, you better speak it into alignment with God's vision. Purpose needs a voice. And that voice has to come from you, not your best friend, not your mentor, not your pastor, you, because the most powerful agreement you'll ever make is the one between your mouth and your mission. And the earlier in the day you make that agreement, the stronger you'll be when resistance comes, because it will come. Life will test the words you speak. The moment you say you're free, something will try to trap you. The moment you say you're focused, something will try to distract you. But when you've declared your purpose in advance, you're already ahead. You're already prepared. You're already armored with truth, not just intention. You may not feel strong every morning. That's okay. Speak strength anyway. You may not feel joyful. Speak joy anyway. You may not feel like you're capable. Speak capability anyway. Because your emotions don't get the final say. Your spirit does. And your spirit speaks through your mouth. That's why you've got to be intentional about what you say when you first wake up. Your voice is a key, and what you unlock with it will either lead you into power or pull you back into passivity. You've got to take ownership of your day before your day tries to own you. You've got to declare peace before the stress hits. You've got to declare patience before the test comes. You've got to declare love before the offense shows up. That's what it means to lead with your spirit. That's what it means to set the tone. You don't let the atmosphere dictate your posture. You bring your own weather. You walk into every room already clear on who you are. And that clarity, it starts in the dark. It starts when no one is watching. It starts with your voice and your vision meeting in the quiet hours of the morning.